In this video, I'm going to give you a behind the scenes look on how I tried to script, film, edit, and color grade my very own iPhone commercial. Completely filmed using an iPhone.
Just sit and wait till you see me fly. You know they'll never see me fly.
Since I had already pretty much emptied out my bank account to buy the new iPhone 15 Pro, I couldn't really afford to pay a large crew to help me out on this project. I called up one of my best mates, Raphael, to ask him if he was down to help us out. Jesus. I also sent my mate Levi Weidmann a text message asking if he was down to act in the commercial. He's a super nice guy and he also happens to be a national BMX champion. What are the odds? And so we got the ball rolling a little bit. Apple themselves recently shared a video in which they gave us a behind the scenes look into how they produced the October Apple event, shot entirely on the iPhone. But if you're like me and you don't have $4 million in lighting, rigging and other equipment lying around at home, then here are some options that I found that might also do the job. Like this camera cage, for example, by Small Rig. I attached two handles to the sides just so that I would have a better grip on the iPhone. And this way I also had a lot more control over the camera movements that I was making. Usually I would use a gimbal for these kind of movements where I rotate in and out, but together with the iPhone's stabilization, it was actually pretty easy to pull it off together with these side handles. I also got some clip-on filters, which actually leads me to one of the most important tips when you want to shoot cinematic videos on an iPhone, which is shoot with a Pro Mist and an ND filter. Shooting with a Pro Mist filter means that your image gets a slightly softer look, with some smoother skin tones and highlights, and the shadows also get lifted a bit. For this shoot, I used quite a strong 1/4 strength Pro Mist, just because that goes really well with the iPhone footage, since it really takes away that over-sharpened look, which phones tend to have these days. On top of my Pro Mist filter, I stacked a variable ND filter, also made by Small Rig. An ND filter simply ensures that you can keep your shutter speed nice and low, which means that the motion blur you get in your videos feels much more realistic and consistent. If you have any other questions, you can just message me on Instagram or leave a comment down below. Now, when I'm trying to find inspiration for my projects, I try to look in as many different places as possible. I might listen to some music, I might go to the movies, I might hang out with some friends, or I might just get bored and go for a walk. And even if none of those things work at first, there's always that one moment where inspiration strikes. Then I usually bring those ideas together in a program called LUTs, where I create a basic structure with all of the shots that I really need, where I fill in the gaps with work that inspires me, but I also make sure to leave quite a lot of space to improvise. But I'll get into that later in this video. Now, if you're not shooting on the new iPhone 15 Pro and you just want to get some quick, easy cinematic shots on your iPhone, then I'd recommend shooting in 30 frames per second or higher, just because that gives the iPhone footage a nice and smooth look. I also underexpose slightly by clicking on the screen, just dragging down a bit. And the most impactful thing I like to do when I just want to make a quick Instagram story or whatever is once you've captured the video on your iPhone, you go to the filters and you select either a dramatic or a vibrant or a cool filter, just because that immediately gives the footage a nice filmic look. But if you really want to level up your iPhone filmmaking game, I would recommend using an external app so that you have full control over all of your settings. For this entire shoot, we used the Blackmagic camera app, which is actually entirely free and really easy to use. With the iPhone, you can of course switch between lenses with just the tap of a button. And one of my personal favorite shots of the entire video turned out to be this close-up macro shot of Levi's eye opening up. I simply switched to the ultra-wide lens of the iPhone 15 Pro, got really close to Levi's eye, and then I locked the focus in the Blackmagic app. There are still quite a few steps I take to get the image from this to this, but I'll get into the color grading and some other visual tricks I apply later in this video. What's up everybody, it's Peter McKinnon here. We just finished off shooting at location number 1. This beautiful skate park over here. The weather's beautiful, and we're gonna go to the second location right now. Apart from that, the iPhone, of course, is super lightweight and compact, which means that you can put it in places which might usually be a lot more difficult to film from. Like in this shot, for example, where we used a Small Rig magic arm clamp and attached the iPhone to the bike so that we could get like a really cool POV looking shot, which usually would have taken me a lot longer to set up. And using that same clamp, I did one shot, for example, where I held that rig in my hand and I kind of spun around in the air like an absolute idiot, and we eventually ended up getting this shot out of it. Whoa! Holy shit. I'm actually flying to Dubai tomorrow to shoot a new project for a client, and there's one thing that I'm still missing, which is a roll of gaffer tape. And because the iPhone is so nice and compact, you can also stick it to a drone. And that's where my good friend Pim Bell came in, who is a masterful FPV drone pilot. And I actually shot my Ferrari 5 film with him, and he did all of the FPV drone shots that we got on that shoot. He shot that with a pocket 4K Blackmagic camera, but for this shoot we thought we'd strap the iPhone to that drone, send it up into the air and just let Pim fly around Levi doing some jumps, and the shots turned out looking insane. So massive thanks to Pim Bell for driving all the way over to Rotterdam to shoot that with us. I also got quite a few questions from people asking how we got the Go iPhone button shot. Now I know that Apple usually uses like $100,000 robot arm to create these kind of smooth movements, but you know, I don't have a robot arm. So we had to come up with a bit of a different solution. I once again set the iPhone's lens to ultra wide. I got really close to the phone itself, focused on the Go button, and then just simply pulled out. And I set the iPhone to autofocus so that once I pulled out, Levi would still be in focus. That way I could just reverse the shot. It would start out with Levi being in focus, and then the camera would push in onto the Go button, and you would get this almost probe lens-like effect. If you're wondering why I've got a disgusted look on my face every time I'm filming a shot in the behind the scenes, well then I'm wondering that also, because I have no idea. The entire sequence where Levi attempts the jump and the phone kind of falls out of his pocket, that all seemed nice and simple in my head, but actually turned out to be a lot more difficult than I had expected. At first I thought I could just film the shot of Levi jumping over me and that I could then VFX the iPhone into that shot. But then I remembered that we had zero budget left. I also remembered that I'm super shit at VFX. So we kind of had to find a different solution and eventually chose a slightly more old school route.
Okay, so if he's there, the phone already needs to be there. Yeah. So it's up when he's up.
Yes. Ready?
Oh! Holy shit! Holy fuck!
Did you catch it?
Raphael actually threw the iPhone into the air at the same time that Levi attempted the BMX trick, so that in the moment that he would be in the air, the iPhone would be right there in the air next to him. But the tricky part, of course, was actually catching the iPhone after Raphael had thrown it up into the air. But I kid you not, we did this shot in one try. Raphael caught the iPhone and it actually turned out to look pretty good without spending any money on VFX. So that was actually a lot of fun. Another shot that I had planned for beforehand was this seamless fall transition. Now I'd seen this transition in a commercial I'd watched of a runner running at the camera, and then the camera would kind of pan up. In that pan, they would cut to a different shot of the runner actually already falling onto the ground. And I wanted to try this with Levi, with the bike, but I loaded the files onto the computer and it just didn't quite feel right. So it was once again time to rethink the shot and come up with a different solution. The solution eventually ended up being to hire our very own stuntman, Raphael.
I am a stuntman now.
Who turned out to be our producer, our catering service, our driver, our voiceover artist, and our stuntman.
The problem is that I think this is actually fun, because I don't care.
Then I ended up cross-cutting the shots of Raphael falling on the ground with a shot of Levi holding up his arm, where we applied some fake blood.
Pretty good if you ask me.
Fucking hell.
In regards to the lighting of the entire video, I used a 5-in-1 reflector for some of the shots just to give Levi's face a bit of extra bounce.
Bounce shot on a canvas.
But most of the things were just simply shot with natural light. There was, however, one scene, the garage scene, which we did create a bit of a lighting setup for. For this scene, I knew beforehand that I wanted to create a really strong color contrast, just so that we could give this a bit of a separate feeling from all of the other shots where we could see Levi cycling outside. The whole thing ended up only being a 3-light setup, actually. I hung up one small Amaran tube light behind Levi, set that to a red color, and then I also placed a larger Amaran light behind this kind of car wheel that we found. And I also set that light to red. Then I set up one more small portable light, which kind of gave some fill on Levi's face and on the bike. I then pumped some smoke into the room with a really cheap smoke machine I got off Amazon, and we were pretty much good to go. I won't be going into detail on the edit itself in this video, but I'm working on a lot more in-depth content for the pre and for the post-production, which I'll be uploading on my website, which you can sign up for free in the link down below. To my surprise, Artlist were actually kind enough to sponsor this video. And since I've personally had an Artlist subscription since I think 2018, 5 or 6 years now, when they reached out to ask me if I wanted to collaborate with them, I said, yes, I'd love to. So here we are. Artlist.io has an amazing library of tens of thousands of really high quality songs, sound effects, stock footage, and other visual assets. And what really sets them apart for me is that they're super selective in the artists that they work with, so you're really guaranteed super high quality content. And for my commercial, I knew that I wanted to have two songs that were very different in mood from each other. Now, on Artlist, I found the cinematic song pretty quickly just by searching for the mood dark and intense, I think, and for the genre cinematic. But the upbeat song, which I preferred also to match some element of the story, that second song was a lot harder to find, until I realized that Artlist actually has an AI powered search engine tool. So I could simply type in words like fall, jump, fly, and so really quickly I found this song called See Me Fly by Rosa, which not only perfectly fit the vibe that I was going for, but which also had those lyrics, See Me Fly, which I thought really nicely matched the shots of Levi and of his iPhone soaring through the air. So massive thanks to Artlist for helping me out with this project. And if you're interested in trying out their platform for yourself, then you can sign up with the link down below in the description to get 2 months for free added to your plan to get some high quality assets. For the sound effects part of this video, I used some sound effects from Artlist. I'm also working on my own sound effects pack, but the natural sounds of Levi riding the BMX or of Levi fixing his bike, I really wanted to record on the iPhone, which actually proved to be really bloody challenging because there was a family of chickens right next to the location where we had to film 80% of our shots at. Of Levi. I have no idea how we're gonna pull this off yet. Maybe they do. I also knew that I wanted to build a bit more tension at the beginning of the video by using the voice of a commentator to make Levi's fall a bit more dramatic. Once again, our knight in shining armor rose to the occasion to narrate the voice of the commentator, and then I simply layered some audio effects on his voice, and eventually the sound went from something sounding like this,
Levi Weidmann, only 22 years old, is doing the last jump of the tournament,
to something sounding a lot better. One of the most essential parts to achieving the cinematic look on an iPhone, I'm going to stop saying cinematic now, is of course the color grading. On the new iPhone 15 Pro, we can finally shoot in ProRes log, which means we have a much more flexible image to work with in post. Step one, of course, as always, is making sure that you get your exposure right. Especially when filming in ProRes, you want to underexpose your shots a little bit by 1 to 2 stops. In my color grading software, I applied a standard Apple Rec 709 LUT. I then corrected the exposure and the white balance of the individual shots. Once that was done, I added a bit of my secret sauce to the images. And finally, I add one more thing, which is probably the most important step, which is to apply targeted masks. This means that you can control different parts of the image so that you can make some parts of the image darker, some brighter, so that you can just create a bit more depth in your images. In this shot, for example, this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looked like after I made those adjustments. I also like to add a very slight RGB effect to the highlights of my image, just because that also gives the image a bit more of a vintage feeling. Be careful though, just don't dial those settings in too high. Even though it's literally insane that this kind of footage is coming out of an iPhone, there are a couple of things that I don't really like about shooting on the iPhone. For example, the iPhone has huge file sizes when shooting in ProRes, even bigger than some of the files that I get from my Sony FX3. The sensor of the iPhone is of course also super small, which means that the depth of field is really difficult to achieve. Did manage to achieve it in some of the shots, but most of the shots you're not going to get that background separation between your subject and the background because the sensor is just simply not big enough. Also, the battery life of this phone while shooting in ProRes log was pretty terrible. I think we had a maximum of 1.5 hours runtime because we didn't have a splitter and we'd already plugged the SSD drive into the iPhone whilst we were filming. We couldn't charge the iPhone at the same time. Overall, even though this iPhone 15 Pro has blown me away, I would still personally very much prefer to shoot on a proper camera, like a designated film camera, just because it feels a lot more authentic. You have much more control, also you have a larger sensor. There are so many different factors that still make a cinema camera worth it, but I think these phones will go pretty far in the coming years. By the way, you can go to my website and download some of my favorite shots shot on the iPhone 15 Pro just to practice your color grading and get some extra time in practicing your color grading. I think that's it. 2 weeks of non-stop shooting and scripting and everything wrapped. The night before we started shooting, I realized suddenly that I was still missing someone to shoot the behind the scenes for this video. So in a bit of panic mode, I put up a story on my Instagram asking if there was anyone that was down to help us out. Bruno Maes and Joost Elffers replied to my story really quickly. So massive thanks to those guys for shooting the BTS of this video. I just want to thank all of you guys also for all the love that you've shown over these past couple of months. I really appreciate that. I'm just super excited to share a lot more content with you guys. Well, thanks for watching. I guess I'll see you in the next one. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to go cycling in the middle of November in Amsterdam. My fingers are literally falling off. They're so cold. Anyways.